good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you're watching this. Welcome to In Conversation With. We're back for a second series and we're really excited to share these new episodes with you. We've got some great people sharing their testimony with us, so do join with us over the coming weeks. As we release episodes, we're going to be doing 2 episodes a week, coming out on a Tuesday and a Thursday afternoon. So we're really excited to share those with you. Hopefully you might have seen some of the first series and I hope you've enjoyed them. If not, do go back and check them out. But it's great to have you with us if it's your first time watching. The idea of this podcast is very simple. We basically just want to share the gospel of Jesus with as many people as possible. Share how Jesus can work in anybody's life, no matter who you are or what you've done, how he can change lives and how he can change your life as well. So I'll just introduce myself as well. My name is James. I'm from Crown Lane Free Methodist Church, and I'll be hosting all these podcast episodes and interviewing the guests that are coming on. So sit back and I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Okay, so today it's great to be joined by and to be in conversation with Matthew Wraight. Matty, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining with us. Could you maybe give us a quick introduction of yourself, Matty?
Yeah, so as you said, my name's Matty or Matthew. I answer to all three. It's strange because I introduce myself generally as Matt. Most people call me Matty. But I probably actually prefer Matthew, but I answer to all three. So, I mean, I'm confused by it all. So I can imagine people trying to figure out what they want to call me is confused as well. Yeah, so my name's Matt. I am 31 years old, 31 years old. And I'm married to one wife, Gemma. We've been married 6 years, 7 years this year. We have one son called Ezra, and we live at Capernwray.
Very good. Brilliant. So Matty, just to start off, could you tell me what your early life was like? You know, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so I grew up in what some people would describe as God's country in Burnley. And so if you don't know geographically where Burnley is, it's about an hour away from Manchester, set in Lancashire. If you know sort of the surrounding towns, it's near Preston and Blackburn. So yeah, so grew up in Burnley for most of my childhood. We lived in one house. We grew up on the edges of an estate called Stoops Estate, which was known as one of the worst places to live in the UK. It was constantly, the Times every year bring out a list of the best places to live and the worst places to live, and Burnley was always in the top 10, and especially Stoops Estate was always in the top 10. So that was kind of like a badge of honour for the ones on Stoops. It was like, well, at least we're in the top 10 for something, you know. But in terms of my life, I grew up in a non-Christian household. My parents were lovely. They were married all the way up until I was about 18 or 19. And yeah, it was a loving household. I've got 2 older brothers. My mum and dad both worked. They even though we lived on sort of the edge of this estate, we weren't a typical family or a typical household from the estate. Both my parents worked, and yeah, they came from off the estate and moved on to the estate, so it was a bit of a difference. And so yeah, they grew up teaching me right from wrong, and up until I was about probably 14 or 15, the best way to describe me would have been a quiet, polite boy. I was probably always unnoticed in classrooms just because I was quiet and I was always nice and polite. So I think probably teachers loved me because they didn't have to pay me any attention. And so, yeah, I was just nice and quiet and polite. Didn't know who Jesus was, didn't know who God was until the age of about 14 or 15. The only time I stepped into a church was for weddings and funerals and maybe the odd christening. So that was kind of the only affiliation that I had with the church or with Jesus. So yeah, I was quite a quiet boy. And then at about 14, 15, I started probably getting in with the wrong crowd, hanging around with people that weren't great for me off the estate, and just got pulled into that kind of lifestyle of drinking, of taking drugs. As I got a bit older, started selling drugs, and just became the opposite person of what I used to be, really. But I was still kind of living that lifestyle at home. So my parents still very much thought that I was a nice, quiet, polite boy. But as soon as I stepped out of the house, I was someone completely different. And my life was a bit of a roller coaster up until the age of about 18 and 19. And I was probably all the things that if you had a son, all the things that you wouldn't want him to be doing, I was doing, which is a part of my life I look back on now, and I'm still amazed it's me. Still sort of baffles me that was me. And about 18 or 19, my parents kind of clocked on to the kind of person that I was and who I was becoming outside of the home, and decided that we were going to move. They'd always loved Cornwall growing up. They always went there on holiday pretty much every year, and they just absolutely loved it. And so they decided that they were going to up sticks and move to Cornwall. And both my older brothers said that they were going to stay in Burnley. So I was like, yeah, I'm 18. I'm going to stay in Burnley as well. And both my mum and dad sort of guilt tripped me into moving with them, and just said, well, if you don't go, then we're not going, and you're kind of stopping us living our dream of living in Cornwall, which was very tactical of my parents. And so so we moved to Cornwall about 18. At the time, I thought it was the worst decision, worst thing in my life. I was a typical, probably moody teenager, and I would say that it was a depressed period of my life, because I was looking at my friends in Burnley, thinking I had all these hundreds of friends, all these people that I knew, and I was stuck in Cornwall. I wasn't at college. I worked in a factory which was full of ladies of an older age, trying to say that at the least offensive way I possibly can. In this factory, we just made cake boards. So like those boards that you can buy in the supermarkets that you can put they're all nicely decorated that you can put your cakes on. That's what we made in this factory. And I didn't go to college. I didn't drive. And so if you know anything about Cornwall geographically, you know that the public transport is non-existent pretty much. And so I relied on my parents for lifts everywhere, and that was difficult. But it was probably the best thing that ever happened in my life, because it took me out of the crowd of people that I was hanging around with, and just put me somewhere where I had to think about the person that I was becoming. And so from there, my life started to change a little bit. Just to mention, about probably around the same time where I started hanging around on the estate, I was introduced to a youth club, and there was a church sort of plant on the estate. And my brother had started going a couple of years previous, and he absolutely loved it. And so I think my mum convinced him to drag me along, which I'm not too sure he was too happy about. So he dragged me along, and so I started to go to this youth club. And primarily I went because they gave us free sweets and free drinks, and there was a couple of decent footballers. And so, I went along mainly for that. But as I was there, I was introduced to this person called Jesus, who I was told loved me, who I was told had a plan for my life. Probably about, I know lots of people who can remember the exact day of when they gave their life to Jesus. But if you know anything about me, you know that I've got a memory like a sieve. And so I can't remember the exact day, but I can remember what I did, sort of, and when it was. It was around Christmas time, and I remember that because we went to our pastor's house, and they had this big decoration on their table where they'd set up a big Christmas town, and it was like fake snow everywhere, and there's a running train that ran around this town. It was pretty impressive. And I remember just going to this youth service and being told that this guy called Jesus was the flesh version of God, and it was God who had come down to offer us salvation. And he hadn't come as a king, and he hadn't come as a warrior. He'd come as a baby boy, and he'd come as the lowest of the low. And he'd put himself in that position to grow up and tell us about God and about his love for us. And I just remember being told that there's no hoops that we need to jump through. There's nothing that we need to do to come into a relationship with him. All we need to do is ask him into our heart and ask for forgiveness for the things, and recognize the sin in our own life. And so I remember going home thinking, yeah, I want a bit of that. That sounds decent. So I remember going home into my room. I shared a room at the time with my brother. I remember just checking that there was no one around and closing the door and getting on my hands and knees and putting my hands like this, because that's how I thought you had to pray, and just asking Jesus into my heart. But it was at the same time that this was going on that I was sort of getting more and more involved on the estate. And so I asked Jesus into my heart, and I very much believe that Jesus came into my life there and then. But I didn't do anything to pursue Jesus. I didn't do anything to pursue that relationship with him. And so my life just sort of went the opposite way of what it should have done.
Yeah, so you just shared a little bit there about sort of early days knowing Jesus, and how you got to Cornwall and you began to reflect on life. When then, Matty, did you would you say that your relationship with Jesus really began to grow? And you said how you prayed in Burnley, but obviously you didn't quite follow it, as it were. And
I think so. About 20, my parents decided to split up when they were in Cornwall, and rather than decide who I was going to live with, I just decided I was going to move back to Burnley. And I just said to them, look, I've given it 2 years in Cornwall, and it's just not working out for me. And so I'm gonna go back to Burnley. But I'd had a 2 year period of thinking about my life and thinking about the person that I was, and knowing that I wasn't a nice person, and knowing that I'd had this truth spoken into my life, and I had made this decision of Jesus. And I think part of that was my 2 years there was the first maybe 6-8 months was me crying out to God, saying, why have you done this to me? Why have you moved me to Cornwall? And sort of a bit of a pity party. And then sort of the time after that was a period of reflection of actually, I was a pretty rotten person. I was doing pretty rotten stuff. As I said, involved with just lots of things that I shouldn't be, lots of violence, just taking advantage of people, and just being a general nuisance and not a nice person. And so at the end of this sort of 2 year period of me deciding to move back to Burnley, I think my parents were worried that I was just going to move back and fall into that same pattern. And I'd kind of said to myself, I'm not going to do that. And I'd made a promise to myself that I wasn't going to go back onto the estate. And I said, there's no way that I'm going back onto the estate, because if I go back onto the estate, I know the type of person that waits for me there. I know what life offers me there, and what waits for me. And so I just said, I'm not going back there. I'm not doing it. And so I moved in with my brother, who had since moved to the sort of the opposite side of town. And all through this period of before I moved to Cornwall, and for a short period after, I was very close friends with the pastor, my pastor's son. And I remained very close friends with him. And all through this period of me being rotten and not very nice, they would always invite me around, and they would always feed me, and they would always look after me. And his mum kind of became my spiritual mum, really. And she never preached at me. She never sort of bashed me with the Bible or made me feel guilty. She just loved me, and she just cared for me like I was one of her own children, even though she probably knew that I wasn't really a very nice person. She just continued to love me. And so through all of this, I'd seen this Jesus living through her and what it could look like to love people. And so when I moved back to Burnley, I didn't immediately pick up Jesus and start following him. I semi-picked up life where it left off, in terms of there was a couple of people that I reconnected with, and I started just working in retail, a bit of a dead end job, really, not really going anywhere. And my life became very repetitive very, very quickly. So I worked through the week and went out at the weekends. And Burnley's a relatively small town. There's probably maybe about 100,000 people that live in Burnley. But the nightlife was pretty active, and it was a decent nightlife. And so every weekend, every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes Monday, I was out enjoying the nightlife. And so I could tell you on a Friday night and on a Saturday night, I could tell you who was going to be out. I could tell you what nightclub they were going to be in at a particular time. I could probably tell you whereabouts they'd be stood or whereabouts they'd be in the nightclub. And I could probably have a good guess at what they'd be drinking. That's how repetitive my life came, you know. And I just remember one Sunday morning, I was probably a little bit rough and a little bit hungover, feeling sorry for myself. But I just remember thinking there has to be more to life than this. I was probably maybe, 23. And I just remember thinking, life has got to offer me more than this. There has to be more to life than this. And I remember this youth Bible that I'd been given from the church. And I remember just picking it up and flicking through the pages, doing a bit of Bible bingo. And I remember falling on this story in the Old Testament. It had little devotional stories every couple of pages. And I remember reading this one devotional story about a guy who had a very similar lifestyle to mine, and how Jesus had just completely transformed his life, and how he'd not thought much of himself. He'd not looked at his own life and thought, oh, I'm going to be something. It was very much the opposite. It very low self-worth, and yeah, very similar story to mine. And I remember reading this verse in this book that transformed his life, and it was Jeremiah 29:11, which is, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And I just remember reading that thinking, I want some of that. I want hope and I want a future. And so I just began reading, and God just gave me a real passion to read his word, and it gave me a real passion to want to get to know him. And the more I read, the more I realized what Jesus had done for me. And so from there, I started attending church. And the church plant that I knew and that introduced me to Jesus, they'd since moved to the other side of town, to a little sort of village on the outskirts of Burnley called Hurstwood. And so I started going to Hurstwood Church, which is the same church that I grew up in. So it's what I would call my home church. And from there, I just started serving, and I just said, I haven't got much tools to work with, God, but whatever I've got, it's yours and you can have. Not thinking that I would do much and that God would use me, but it's a dangerous prayer to pray, because he did use me. And so I'd probably say around 23 is when God sort of just gave me a passion to want to get to know him, and I made a decision at that point in my life that I was gonna pursue him.
You've kind of touched on it a little bit already. I just wonder if you could just share with us what sort of a change Jesus made in your life, whether there was an immediate change or,
I think I wouldn't say it was an immediate change in terms of practically and how that outlived in my life. In terms of a mentality, when I read that passage in Jeremiah, I'd say there was a definite change within my own mindset and my own thoughts. But I'd say the biggest change that knowing Jesus has made in my life is he's given me a hope. As you've heard, growing up, I was a bit of a rotten egg, and I had this attitude probably from the people that I used to hang around with, and the people that I saw, the older people that I saw that was around me. I had this attitude and mentality that I wasn't going to achieve anything. I wasn't going to amount to much. I didn't consider myself particularly intelligent. Didn't consider myself that I was going to change the world, as it were. I was very much going to be just another face in the crowd. And knowing Jesus has given me a hope that actually, if it's him living through me, that I can achieve anything, and that he will use me to do great things. And he's given me a future. And if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would I be where I am today? I would have probably laughed at you, because I saw my life heading pretty much one direction, and that was probably prison. And so, yeah, knowing Jesus and walking with Jesus daily has given me a hope that God has a plan and a purpose for my life, and it is very good. And all I need to do is continue to pursue a relationship with him, is continue to look at him for my hope and for my strength, and he will live out that hope in my life.